Well, here we are. Here we are for this Wednesday webinar. Welcome, everyone. Yes, today, Wednesday, noon here in Montreal, Eastern Time, where I'm actually streaming from you. Welcome, Los Angeles, California, West Coast, everyone in the US, for that matter of fact. And all the way to Europe, it's 6 o'clock tonight. Bonjour, les amis en France. Welcome, everyone in Europe. And if we are lucky, maybe we have Asia that's joining late tonight. Thank you for joining for today's webinar on Pro Tools, the continuation of the webinar that we've actually started last or 2 weeks ago, which was primarily the introduction to this integration. I'm going to be pushing this a bit forward today. I do recommend to people, if you haven't watched the last webinar, well, it's something, to be maybe good to watch later, because I'll be kind of skipping some of the basic subjects, but I'm sure you will be, getting a lot of information today, and we can actually jump on the subject. So yes, indeed, my name is Hugo Larin. For the ones that are new to these webinars, we've been doing regular webinars on various subjects. Lately, Pro Tools, we've covered Meyer Sound, Space MapGo integration not long ago, Ableton Live. We have a Q Lab. We have a long list of webinars. They are all available on the live section of YouTube. So feel free to jump. Actually to go, to go see these ones, as need be. But again, today focusing on the Pro Tools aspect, and that will be an intense one. I'll try to keep it to an hour. That's the target, even 45, 50 minutes. I can tell you it may go longer, but we'll try. We'll try to be moving along. So let's get started. Let's get started. The sooner we start, the better it is, right? Good stuff. Okay, so just kind of in review, right? To kind of briefly go over, what we've talked about last time, about this integration, just to kind of wrap up so we can skip right away on the new aspect. So, right, the old concept here was to be able to insert SPAT Revolution in that DAW, in that workstation in Pro Tools. We call this the insert mode, right? Where we're basically going to be, using Pro Tools for playing back, SPAT Revolution to render, to deliver these renders, binaural audio, channel-based beds of various forms, ambisonic, and we're going to be returning them to Pro Tools to actually bounce them and monitor them. That is an insert workflow that we focus. There is inline workflow, right? Pro Tools, playing back, SPAT rendering, and attacking directly a system or directly another recording system. But here we're focusing on what we can call an insert mode. So yeah, an insert mode. And what we're doing for this integration is we're using one of our plugin, our integration plugin called SPAT Send. So this actual plugin is basically, allowing your track, your audio track, or today we're going to be talking about your routing folder, your object, to actually, communicate with SPAT. And, we'll kind of talk about this. We'll talk to them primarily about how to communicate, not necessarily using our local audio pad feature. We'll briefly look at it because this is where we stopped last time. We'll pick up from there, and we'll be moving on into using beautiful feature from Pro Tools since, I would say, 2209, if my memory is correct, Aux IO and Aux IO primarily, and audio devices, virtual audio devices. So we're going to be returning to SPAT, right? Back this integration, are these channel-based, these binaural, these ambisonic, to print and potentially to monitor as well. Well, you're printing, you're monitoring at the same time. Important to understand, source are not necessarily our objects. We call them sources, objects, same thing. They're not necessarily mono, right? We can take a mono track, we can take a stereo track, we can take a multi-channel track and bring it to SPAT for later on. Spatializing, transcoding as well. So yes, that means ambisonic. You have an ambisonic capture, raw A format, B format, bring to SPAT, transcode, spatialize, move, or manipulate, I should say, and then return as channel bed or as ambisonic as need be. So important to understand that there's no limitation on this. And then we're going to be accessing all these parameters, right, with the automation. So traditional automation parameters that get, written. So plug-in parameters, they get written. So you can, obviously read, you can write. It's a bidirectional integration. So it's not just one way. You can be moving in SPAT with the mouse, writes to the DAW, to Pro Tools, or for that matter of fact, you could be using external resource. Towards the end, I'll be showing with the SPAT remote control how to manipulate, get tactile control to be writing into Pro Tools. Okay, so there's three integration plugin, the SPAT send, the SPAT return. We've talked about those, and there's SPAT room as well to control the room. And last but not least, yes, as I was saying, right, we're going to be controlling these parameters with what? Well, a control surface, Eucon, in this case, Avid control, which I'll pop up at one point as well, S1, S3, S4, and all the Eucon family. Any basically remote control of the DAW would allow you to actually map these parameters as well with what we call page table, which are all prepared. We'll see them in not too long. Okay, hope this makes sense. Fairly straightforward. That was kind of where we stopped last time, and we started last time in explaining this basic integration. We're not going to go through everything. Briefly to remind you about this insert mode, right? This is what you have on the left side. Playback, record system, Pro Tools, sends audio tracks, audio objects, and we'll talk about object tracks today as aux, as routing folder. They are the same thing. Sending to SPAT, rendering, returning, and then we're printing, these beds, these tracks, and we're monitoring them at the same time. So on the left side. On the right side is what we call an inline, which we are not focusing on today. Okay. Good stuff. Now let's talk about audio routing briefly, because it's always an interesting conversation. How do we route this stuff? Well, single computer, dual computer, right? Various options. In the case of a single computer, you can send and return the audio with what we call, right, this local audio path function with our SPAT plugin, which we've explored last week in a basic function, and we'll explore in a few seconds in a more advanced, organized routing folder way. With one of our templates. I'll be fairly straightforward. But for a big part of today, yes, bridge audio devices. Again, thanks to Pro Tools 2209, various audio bridge devices that exist now. So we could use those with the Aux IO feature of Pro Tools to actually send audio or return audio. In a dual computer setup, what's interesting is this all audio bridge solution I'm talking about on a single machine can easily be moved to a dual computer. How? Well, instead of sending the audio and returning the audio with these local audio bridge device, bridging application, you'll just change this to a Dante device, to a MADI device, to whatever iChannel count device, AVB audio, iChannel count device to go to a dual computer. So very simple. When you're not using the local audio path and you're using more like the audio bridge, it's very easy to move to dual computer setups. Yeah, standard core audio in this case, or Aux IO driver. It is obviously cross-platform for the people that do not know. And then ultimately we'll be monitoring back into Pro Tools. And we're going to be using our playback engine in this particular case. So that's the key part to the Aux IO story, is we don't need to move that playback engine. Maybe it's an HDX, maybe it's our Scarlett device, maybe it's whatever, our audio device, maybe it's an MTRX or not MTRX, but anyway, one of the actual, an MTRX with the new Thunderbolt card and driver, for example. Whatever this is, you'll be able to maintain that playback engine, and we'll use the Aux IO in this particular case. And we'll be returning and monitoring what? Well, monitoring to headphone, to the studio system, all right? So you're going to keep that monitoring aspect in Pro Tools with full control. Okay. Good. Now let's look at a few diagrams, because it's always kind of interesting to see, what this is all about. We've shown this one last week. This is where we started, right? We basically have some audio tracks. We put the send plugin on it, and we then put a master track, or on our master track, which normally our tracks are routed to. We'll just be putting the SPAT return plugin on that master, and that's it. That's all. That was the most simple way to look at it. And we showed this last week. Now someone could say, well, Hugo, if I want to be doing, multiple returns, I'm going to be dealing with this. And it's important to note on this particular one, and most importantly, you'll see it on the next one, is your actual tracks are actually still feeding the return. what ends up happening is the return plugin on the master replaces the content of that master with what's coming back from SPAT. It basically overrides it. And it's important to understand that this routing must be kept. The routing tracks the master, even if we're going to be overriding it. And this has to do with synchronization and ensure that Pro Tools processes the SPAT plugin before it processes the SPAT return. If there's obviously no return and change, and that is just has to do with the logic in Pro Tools. So hence with this, what we call the sync track becomes important. In this simple session, we did not spend any much time on the sync conversation. We kept it very straightforward to a single return. So you want to do a 712, you got some aux track, you want to do a binaural audio, you've got multiple tracks, one master, this is it. This is what we showed last week. But there are some limitations, and there's obviously how do we start to do multiple returns. Maybe you want a binaural, you want a 712, a 916, maybe an ambisonic delivery at the same time, and that's actually going to start to expand the reality. Thanks to these templates that we have, right, it makes it fairly straightforward. We'll be exploring them today, and we'll wrap up at the end more looking at how do we build this from scratch. Not necessarily in the concept of local audio path. We'll spend a bit of time on this, but today we'll be focusing on the audio bridge and the Aux IO, which is very powerful, very flexible, easy to turn around and such. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, which you'll see in the template there, is that actually the SPAT object, the audio tracks or itself or the actual routing folder auxes where are becoming our object, which we'll talk about a lot today, are feeding their output into the input of these return buses, right? You see the SPAT send, you see the SPAT returns. This routing is very important. And what we've actually have in all our template is called the sync bus. It's a sync bus with all track width, any track width, so you basically can feed anything, but you can, feed any objects to it, and then it returns to the actual aux return tracks, and that's to keep the synchronization. So yeah, keeping things in sync is what we are talking about here, and we'll see this thanks to the template again. It's I have to set it up every single time. So yeah, maybe we're returning a bed mix. This would be a 712 in the example there, but then you're going to want to, and yeah, a little parenthesis on this one. We are not limited to Pro Tools bus limitation. Well, now Pro Tools bus limitation, I guess that slide is aged a bit. It's not aged, but it was not, for people that are prior to 2306 with Pro Tools, obviously there was some bus limitation, ambisonic third order, 712 buses. But now with 2306, there's the release of track width all the way to 916, ambisonic all the way to 7th order. So obviously the limitations are not as, not going to say bad, but as, challenging, that it was before. Now, I'm not going to spend time on this particular subject today, but the reason it's written not limited to Pro Tools bus limitation is simple. You could be creating, 22 outputs of SPAT and returning them into a bunch of mono tracks or a bunch of stereo tracks. What a mono track would make more sense, and return them as multiple returns. It's no fun. You've got to break, your routing in SPAT to make sure you return them in different mono, but it's definitely possible. And that's how we did it before, right? If we wanted to return a 22 channel, a 22.2 NHK Japan standard to SPAT to Pro Tools, well, we were basically taking 3 8-channel buses to return part 1, part 2, part 3 for a total of 24 channels, 22.2. Not spending time on this, not to confuse the conversation. The point is that you're not necessarily limited to those. You can obviously ultimately break them, but that's for a later conversation or in support or on actual, our chat here today if people are very interested about this. So yeah, returning a bed mix. We probably want to return a binaural mix or multiple one, maybe listening to this different RTFs and so on and so forth. So we have the ability to return one and or multiple ones, alternate mixes. They could be ambisonics, other beds format at the same time. SPAT is not doing any down mixing, but will actually give you with the same scene an output based on your speaker arrangement decision. Okay, and that is another powerful tool. And as I said, we're not down mixing here. We'll taking the sources, their position. There's some interesting thing about efficiency zones and stuff. Not for the subject of today, but and yeah, obviously binaural and ambisonic, a bunch of them. Okay. Now, let's move on to that conversation. How would we achieve this? Well, again, back to this SPAT sync bus I was talking about. This is the green line that you could see. We're basically ensuring that everything, all the tracks, being an aux or being an actual audio track, feeds a common bus, and that common bus feeds the return. Anyway, we don't necessarily care. We'll be replacing the content of print 1, print 2, print 3, print 4 that you see on screen with the SPAT return. But interestingly enough, if SPAT is not present, the signal is going to flow in a normal way. Basically, as soon as SPAT opens, it overwrites the content. That's simply what it is. So this is actually what we're going to be kind of looking at today. And we'll look at it with another set of, a conversation is how to keep things organized, right? And the routing folder is to the rescue here in Pro Tools. Because, yeah, now you've got tracks and you've got multiple bed returns and then, managing, there's the sync bus. So, and there's some limitations that we've explained as well. And, with using the actual SPAT send on the aux track. For some of you that were there last week may remember these limitations. We can briefly go over them, to talk about these limitations, which have to do with, number one, the fact that Pro Tools is pre-fader insert only. What does that mean? You put an audio track, you put the SPAT plugin, all the signals is going, but it's going pre-fader. So you can no longer actually use your solo, your mutes, and your fader. If you're used to using these fader, putting your automation on that fader, well, you kind of lost that ability because we've picked up the signal before. And this is where the aux routing or the auxes of the routing folder are going to become critical or conversation of the day. So it can be a challenge, mainly a workflow change for users. Many guys actually are fine working entirely in SPAT. Why? Well, SPAT as a gain, SPAT as a mute, SPAT as a solo, or remote as a mute. We have, so you can control pretty much everything. We have these parameters, presence factors. So basically, you are completely in control. It's just you're going to be moving away from your typical automation, right, which is the fader, and you won't be using the solo in Pro Tools itself. So yeah, maybe a challenge for some people, but we have user that, using the solo in SPAT, using the mute whenever, we have a parameter to enable the track, which is basically the mute, and so on and so forth. And what we are doing at that level, and that's where we encourage people to work in SPAT, is the position of the SPAT object is actually tied as well to a attenuation model, right? So where an object position will affect the presence. We're not obliged to use it, but it's part of the model. It's part of this advanced model that we have and that we're very happy to promote. It's tying what we call the perceptual model of SPAT Revolution, right? So you're moving the object away. It's like playing a dry wet on the reverb, because if you are using the reverb engine and so on and so forth. But these were the limitations and the challenges. So what do we do? What's to the rescue of this? Well, there's only one solution, and this is, sorry for that, and this is using auxes as tracks. And I say auxes, yes, routing folder are auxes. They are the same exact thing. Well, not exact thing, but yes, as far as a track goes, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it is. So we're going to be using aux tracks as object, and the advantage there is we'll gain back the control of our fader, of our solo, of the actual track itself, the audio track itself. All right, so we're going to be gaining this back, and that's one of the reasons to do this, and there's other reason to do so. So yeah, aux track becoming your objects, instead of managing this on the tracks, kind of keep things separate, right? You can have all these objects that are, your automation going to the, to the rendering engine, keeping your track clean, if you want to call it this way. Another aspect to this is, we can start to think about getting organized, because the routing folder will put the track or tracks going to that object into a folder. We're not obliged to do it this way. We could, organize differently, but the routing folder can allow us to do this. Mainly on larger, complex projects, this is very, very, very powerful. So we're keeping things organized a bit. And then why an aux track? Well, multiple audio tracks can then be routed to it, right? Maybe we've got multiple parts here. Maybe we've got just a bunch of tracks. They're all ultimately running the same object. They're not, they don't have, signal at the same time. You're basically stacking a bunch of audio tracks, but it's actually a single object as far as spatialization is concerned, right? So this is another way to simplify this. And yes, we have templates. We'll load it up in 2 seconds. And because, let's remove my big face from this. And because we like actually to see diagram, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, now we're seeing with the local audio path. We're not even going to need to bother with the actual sync at one point, but now you're seeing it with the actual sync, part of the template. Audio tracks, each audio tracks are feeding an object. Or multiple tracks feeding the same objects. These objects in yellow, object 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are the one that gets the SPAT sent. And this way, you're maintaining the actual fader, a control of the aux track, because this is what is feeding the actual object in yellow. And then, yes, ultimately, we have these object tracks routed to the return for multiple beds. Same conversation as before. Okay. Moving on. Yes, let's actually look and talk about the next part, which is the actual template. We'll start right now. We'll load this template. We'll get things going. So it's going to allow us to kind of look at, we'll insert a few audio tracks in it. We'll get some audio going, multiple returns at the same time, and we'll be actually good to go. Now, I'm going to tell you where these templates are later. From SPAT, you can access the resource section for the ones that knows, and I'll show you on the website where to find them all. At the end, we have a few of them. I'm going to be using the studio today, the 32 channel studio. So it's the smaller template, smaller session. We have the ones that we call the ultimate ones as well. That have larger capacities and are mainly to deal with Pro Tools Ultimate. And in our template case, we always have 2 templates: one using local audio path with that all sync stuff, and the other one using audio bridging, i.e. Aux IO. Okay, let's try that. Let's try that, and let's move to, this is it. This is it. This is me. Everything is good. So we have Pro Tools right there, right? For people that are familiar with these templates, they are right there, Dolby templates. Bunch of Pro Tools pre-created templates, and you can put your FLUX templates in a folder. This is what I do. I'm not going to talk about template folder location today. So here I actually have on my template group if I want and all the template that exists. We're going to be opening this one, Pro Tools Studio Local Audio Path. We'll give a name, Webinar 19. That is today. And we're going to say, go to that. And see what that does. Or nothing. Yes, it does. Creates. Yeah, LTC generator, that's just plugin that's still in a session. Building the clip list and so on and so forth. And here we are, and the program looks good. So here we are. We see actually our mixer view. If I actually switch rapidly, to the actual edit view, this is what we have going. Now this template, if we actually go back to the mixer, this template is basically a bunch of routing folder. You can see here the first routing folder, and there's a little description that tells you what they are. This is the routing folder. I shouldn't say routing, a folder that contains all the actual, and in this template, we have 24 mono objects, SPAT mono objects. If I double click on them, you'll see their names, SPAT mono object 16, and so on and so forth. So 24 objects. They all have the SPAT send plugin instantiated with the proper name, which gets done automatically, SPAT mono object 1. So this is all instantiated on all the tracks. We've talked about automation as well, which we'll talk about later. If I'm looking at a plugin, specific one, you will see that a bunch of plugin automation parameters are already included, so you're ready to write in this game. There's a few new ones. I think these are from our latest version. We've added some parameters, so they were not added by default, but all the automation parameters, or a bunch of the important automation parameters, are already added. So you'll be kind of ready to rock, to write, and to do anything. You can see right now in the first object, if I actually open the folder, I have an example track here just to kind of show the deal. This is one audio track, that is there. It is actually feeding a mono object, which is that corresponding routing folder. This is the old concept of routing folder. So right now we already have one object going to SPAT. You can see the signal there. Thanks to the fader, yeah, you gain back the control. You've gained back the actual control of the fader. This was the old conversation of moving to aux track. And as simple as this. Now the template has more. The template has SPAT stereo objects. We've got 4 stereo ones. So this is ready for a 32 channel, which matches our SPAT essential version. Our SPAT essential version, which has 32 sources. So 24 plus 8 for a total of 32. All in folder, all organized. Now, what do we have next? The folder for the SPAT renders. So these are the return. One track here, which is the actual return for a 712. One track here, I should say track, one aux that is actually the binaural return. And you see the SPAT send plugin is actually there, called SPAT return 712. So it'll be identified in SPAT Revolution when we get there. We have a binaural return here, and we actually have a HOA third order. So we are ready with this session to return 3 actual renders simultaneously. Now, so you understand the dynamic in the routing there? Yes, it's a return auxes, but we obviously need to print it. So that Atmos mix 712 is actually, if you look at the track right next to it, is actually feeding a track to actually be able to bounce it, to print it. So these are tracks. This one, I can arm this track to bounce the 712, to bounce the binaural, to bounce the HOA, or obviously to bounce the 3 of them at the same time if I wanted to. And the routing is, I'm not sure, there's not an easy zoom here, but yeah, the routing is kind of simple, right? There is a bus, for it. We're going to be looking at all these buses later. The template is all ready for you. So let me just focus on how to get started with the template. We'll be coming back on some of this. We'll do some together as well, so you clearly understand. I'm not going to go through all the details right away. We'll build up from there. Anyway, templates are ready to rock. So what do we be able to do? Well, we may want to add some object later. We may cover this, but let's just start to say, hey, we want to add some audio into this. How I'm going to be able to deal with it. Let me bring this edit window. We're going to be bringing our Akagera tracks, which I actually used last week. This was from the little video you saw at the beginning. We love this video because it's actually a quite old one that we did, but it's just, great music, great live recording. It was a great project for us, so felt like sharing it to you today. So I'm going to be dragging these actual track from that live recording. Boom, it's in Pro Tools. We've got the aux tracks. Now, Hugo, are we obliged to move the track into the folder? Not at all. If you want to keep your things organized with your own folder and your own structure, you're not obliged to do this at all, okay? So the question will be now, well, how do we route those to these pre-created objects, right? So we're starting a session. The first thing I'll tell you is you'll see that there's 2 mono, 2 stereos, and 4 mono. To simplify my quick shortcuts for routing, I'm actually going to take these 2 stereo babies and I'm going to drag them down. Okay, so I've got right now 6 mono, 2 stereo. Why am I doing this? People experiencing Pro Tools understand that my next step is I'm multi-selecting the kick, snare, marimba, left, center, right, and trombone. I'm going to hit Shift, Option, Command if my memory is correct. And I'll then be able to say, A, kick, snare, marimba, feed, mono, object, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this work, 1, 2, is it 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're done. These 6 tracks are feeding our 6 first objects. Let's do the stereo this time as we have dedicated objects, right? These objects right there, these 4 objects that we have these dedicated folders, a dedicated folder with dedicated object. Let's now patch these 2. Again, Shift, Option, Command. Sorry, I'm a Mac guy. And we'll pick up the output of that overhead and that vibraphone, and we'll be sending it to stereo object 1 and 2. So that's it, and that works. So we are done. If I am to play this, actually, how I'm going to be able to listen to this? Quite simply, my setup, my playback engine is using an audio bridge device, which I'm sending to my streaming software. You'll be able to get this audio going on. So if I'm actually playing something right now, probably anything won't happen because SPAT is not there. Let me move to something. Anyway, we see that audio is moving. Yeah, actually, in SPAT is not there, so the signals are going to the actual returns. So actually, let me just patch the output. Just gonna rapidly put the binaural output into your ears on output 1 and 2. And one thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna mute this thing here. Okay, so here we are. So now we're just listening to the raw tracks, basically that are routed to our session. If I show up the mixer, that may make more sense to you. All right, we'll minimize these objects, right? We've got these track playing, mono, stereo. Nothing is span, it's just straight out. If I'm looking at my SPAT mono objects, I can see the kick feeding, you know, all these 6 first instruments are being fed. Don't need to see you, baby. Yep. And here we actually have our 2 stereo tracks, okay? As simple as this. So we are done. We are kind of done from the perspective of adding audio tracks, sending it to these mono or stereo object. We're actually gonna right now fire SPAT Revolution, get that portion going. Again, we'll use the template. Everything is gonna get connected right away and we'll be done. So let's actually do this. I'm gonna open these SPAT renders because we're gonna need them. Let me just switch to our lovely SPAT here and Pro Tools. We'll keep them both alive for the next portion. And how does that look? Yeah, that looks missing maybe a bit here. Let me just sorry for that. I'm just gonna prepare these 2 windows. Okay, and can I go to this mixer view? Yep, good stuff. So now we are in SPAT mode. You got SPAT on our right side, and you can actually see that everything is connected from these SPATs. And oh, Hugo, you didn't get to show us how to do it. Yeah, we will. We will. And we've seen last week there's no need to configure audio input, audio output, because we're using these SPATs. And we've talked about all this reality. Let me just actually close this session. Say okay, and what we've basically opened here is the SPAT Revolution template for Studio version compatible with the Pro Tools Studio LAP, which is local audio pad. So this is the template we've opened, and all the connections are done. And let's see what happens here. So what we have in this setup, again, 712 bed, the binaural, the HOA. We are on purpose muting the HOA on the template. Takes a bunch of resources. If you don't need it, can obviously unmute it and we should be fine. So if I play this session now, it's working. And as you saw, it was sending a return, a binaural, and an HOA. And then in the binaural, I am doing input monitor because this is what you're listening here, right? This is you guys. This is the feed. So if I actually go into SPAT right now, what I'll see is I have a bunch of objects. They are all in their default position, right? Object 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let me start to play here a bit. We'll start to position some stuff. Oh, and maybe I actually want to use as well the remote to move them, but I can do it manually for now. Bring the remote later. So let's start to play with this quickly. And that's it. So I've started to work the scene. I haven't done any automation now, right? But we have the signal going. We can solo on the object. We can get obviously in the advanced parameter of each object. Right now, by default, this session has reverb enabled on everything. So yes, you are hearing the reverb engine. So right, it doesn't sound dry as it was earlier. Well, that's because it's feeding the reverb. We've got the default reverb setting. The complete model, the perceptual model of SPAT is all engaged, full reverb. Obviously, you may want to say, I don't want any reverb on the kick, and you can just put this off, you know, as it is, and no problem. Simple, simple, simple. Good. I think that, you know, we kind of explored this first portion, but now this next question is, well, Hugo, how are we going to be writing, you know, and is the automation writing possible? Well, completely possible. So in the case of automation right now, we won't be actually automating on these tracks. Yeah, we may automate some actual volume, you know, that you're driving indeed, or you know, maybe some mutes if you want to, and you maybe have a bunch of you know, plugins for processing control which you'll automate. But where the automation is going to happen is into these actual objects. So this particular object, object 1 for example, well, let's take object 6 because it is our trombone. And yes, you can actually make and name this the trombone, right? If you don't want to, you know, actually have to deal with just, you know, raw information and see what happened on the SPAT side. I've renamed the object in Pro Tools and SPAT got the new name. So yes, you can do all your naming. You're not obliged to call these objects SPAT mono object 5. You can call them OBG, OBG1 to whatever. You can name them. You can obviously polish this as much as possible to keep things organized. And then thanks to the, you know, the actual filtering in SPAT, you can look at, you know, trombone, find some objects, or find all your drum objects if you mean your naming accordingly, so you can rapidly filter. Bunch of possible strategy here. So yeah, object 6, back to this object 6, the trombone. As we said earlier, the automation dialog is all set. So easy, all their parameters are all ready to be recorded. And well, let's see if that is true. Back to the mixer here. We don't need to leave that window open. And we can actually see if we can be writing anything. Let me just kill one little window that I do not need to see. So many things on my screen, you would not believe it. Thank you. Okay, so here, SPAT mono object. We are in read mode. Let's actually go straight in write mode. And for the sake of this exercise, we're going to be looking at automation, SPAT revolution, and we'll go strictly for our azimuth. And we can go azimuth, elevation, distance, the default automation of SPAT, the polar mechanism. So let's see if everything works. This is where we cross our finger. Well, not sure I actually wrote anything. Did I do something wrong here? Well, I'm on object 1. Hugo, are you not following here? Is there someone on the chat that's saying, Hugo, you're sleeping on the switch? What about we do it on object 6? That would be way better. What do you think? Manipulating object 6 and expecting object 1 to record is not the greatest strategy of the world. Okay, back to object 6. Writing. Let's move out a bit here. This is what we want. This is obviously what we want. It would even be better if we had some music. What about we have some trombone playing? Okay, so I think that we are good here. We've kind of showed the concept. The automation was ready to write. We can put all the objects in writing mode. We'll talk about automation strategy. Should we actually automate everything or not? There's some consequences. More that you automate, more that you touch, more that you edit, more that you manage. The strategy may not be your preferred to include all. You're more than welcome to remove the automation parameters that you do not want. But yes, ultimately, you could be writing everything if you wanted to. Are we doing on time? Yes. Moving on. I guess the only question that we could cover here, we could actually remove watching the automation, and we don't need to see this one. Let's remove the folder. Let's get this clean. Now the question may be, well, Hugo, if I want to have more mono objects because I don't want to actually add a few. Well, you can actually do this quite simply. We'll look at it a bit later, but if you take this actual mono object, for example, folder that I've created, right, you could rapidly say, hey, I want to be adding new tracks in Pro Tools, and you're going to be adding, let's say 4 mono objects. So we'll add 4 extra mono objects. Let's say that the 24 limitation was not good for us. We'll leave them mono, and we're going to go for routing folder, and we're going to call them whatever we want. I'm just going to call that OBG now for object 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to go create. Now, what actually happened there is these objects got created. They are pretty much ready to go. We could bring them into our folder if we wanted to keep things organized, and they are at the end. And the last part actually will be quite, simple here. We're going to be just needing to insert the SPAT, send into it, which you can do manually, or you can actually option drag, and we've just instantiated. You see object 29. We had 24 mono, 4 stereo, so that was 28. That's object 29. Audio is enabled because this is a copy. And if you actually go in your SPAT setup, you'll see that that object, OBG1, is just there. Click and drag. Boom, it's connected. 1 room, 2 room, and 3 rooms. And there we go. We've just added an object. I'm going to go into all the details. We'll get back into the routing. You obviously need to make sure that this object goes to the sync bus, right? The famous sync bus that we've talked about earlier, because that will be important to keep in sync. But that's it. Now I can be sending audio to this object. It's going to SPAT, and because I've just chose the output to be on the sync bus, like any other object, basically following the output routing, you're done. Okay? You could do the same thing for mono, for stereo. Mind the index number. We're not going to talk about it now, but I do want to mention it right away. These copy and copy plugins and add plugins, whenever you're using local audio PAT, you do not need this index. There's a unique ID inside the plugin and SPAT that makes that communication work, all the handshake. The only reason I mentioned this OSC index is that beware that this track mono object 25 now, because we've added one, is actually index number 29. That's because 25 was taken. And index number are very important when we do OSC, which we'll be doing in the routing folder, in audio bridge and routing folder. So I just remind you that this is very important to well manage, well prepare for these actual indexes. Okay, good. Let's take a break from me talking and showing stuff. And let's go back to the deck. Let's go back to the deck and see where we were at here. Okay, good. Moving along. Well, let's dive. We did a first dive. Okay, so the content, yeah, thanks to Akagera for giving us the right, this little live immersive production we did, recorded, drum, marimba, vibraphone, trombone, sounds great. You just put some reverb. Thank you for that content, that was great. In review of what we've discussed briefly, right, you insert your track and you assign them to your object buses. This is what we did, 6 mono tracks, assign them to mono object 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's it, mono stereo, that's it. And this next thing that you actually do is you can add new routing folders as new object, like I just did, right? Added 4 new objects, we're ready to roll, and we instantiate the SPAT spanning the sync, and we are done. Right, so you've seen this, the option drag copy, option and dragging to copy the plugin was very fast for us. Now make sure your automation dialog is set. Whenever you copy, you're copying the automation dialog as well. So maybe sometime it's better to start with a brand new SPAT plugin and decide on the automation if you don't want to include everything. But we'll get back on the automation conversation. The multi-selecting of tracks, shift option and control. Shift option control, I'm missing one here. To change the routing, for example, the sync bus, same thing, right? So, right, we look at routing. We've talked about the shortcuts earlier, but if you created 4 new objects, you could obviously take these 4, multi-select them, and assign them all together on the sync bus in one shot. That's just the important thing for the routing. We could do the same thing for new aux as well for new returns. Not going to dive into this now, but same concept. If you want to add extra return buses to actually have more render, obviously computer size will become a challenge. More renders, more processing, more reverb engine, one computer. We have powerful machines today. The M1, the M2s are beasts. Yeah, just be aware of that. At one point, yes, 2 machines is always very interesting. If you're running video, a lot of processing, definitely consider the dual machine setup. So we'll do the same thing, insert the SPAT return, make sure again the input is set to the sync bus. You've seen this in the diagrams, and we'll be routing these return aux to a bus that will be doing what? That will be feeding an actual track for the recording, and will be monitoring that track, feed the audio system to that track. Okay, good stuff. My God, we're moving to Aux IO and we're already 15 minutes in. You see, crazy. Change it to read after write. Yes, good call. Yeah, we could change it to read after write, and obviously maybe to touch if you want to be in touch mode. We'll see doing some touch on the later one. So moving to Aux IO right now. I'm just watching some of the comments. Here we go. Okay, moving to the Aux IO conversation. So Pro Tools 2209 install these audio bridges devices. What's an audio bridge device? Application to application. Black Hole, Dolby Audio Bridge, Pro Tools Audio Bridge now, and others exist here. Simple to route audio. This is how I'm feeding you today. I'm feeding you with the Pro Tools 2-channel audio bridge. Or no, sorry, I'm doing the Black Hole 16-channel today. Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's my way to get Pro Tools out to my streaming platform here. Next, new Aux IO allow you to route to other devices. We'll do this together. We can do it. We'll start with a template and then we'll do it from scratch. Allow you to route without losing your main playback engine. That's the key part of it. We've briefly touched about it. An alternative to using device aggregate. Some people are using aggregate this audio device with a bridge device. Aggregates are not always the greatest thing to manage. Not all playback engine play well with aggregate. In some cases, an HDX would definitely be a different scenario as well. So yes, the reason is we're keeping this clean and we're kind of moving away from this aggregate concept. And this makes it simple, as I said, moving from a dual setup. If you decide to move to dual, setup gets bigger, more things involved. You can easily do it, just change the route, just change where the objects are going and returning, and you're done. And yes, why is the other reason? Well, not having to deal with this sync, right? So having all the tracks, the mono objects and stereo object feed the sync bus, and then the sync bus feeding all the returns. This is great, keeps things in sync. There's templates, you could do it. But if you don't want to have to manage this on very large session, yeah, that allows you to move away from that reality, okay? Good stuff. Now, quick image on what we're talking about here. Right, this is the configuration we're talking about here. Pro Tools on the right, left side, SPAT Revolution on the right side. What we've got basically is, you know, the routing of these object tracks that are going to our playback engine, an aggregate device, or the Aux IO here, right? And we have the aux returns, which are basically getting their input from the input buses. The input of IO setup, as simple as this. And how's the communication going in the plugin to SPAT? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The beautiful thing now is that the presets already exist. So when we set up SPAT together, you'll see two presets that actually matches automatically. So there's no playing around with the input IP address, output IP address for a single machine. Just set SPAT and you go. Okay, so that gives you a little idea. And yes, remote control fits in the equation. Eucon can obviously control the plugin on the track, on the object track, so you can manipulate it. And we'll do this at the same time. We'll look at the remote control ability to move object into SPAT that routes into it. So that forms a really complete workstation to create with. We have a powerful computer. You can actually do a lot of things with that kind of setup, okay? Making sense. Now, yes, so there are our bridges. So multiple actual devices to support independent inputs and output. Because the thing with bridges is if you have only one bridge device, when you send on the output, come back on the input. It's dangerous for feedback, that's for sure. So what they've actually done is they created multiple of these AUX's devices, or audio bridge devices. You see two version of a 2-channel, a 6, a 16, a 32, and a 64. We'll be using the 32 and the 64 today. Using the 32 and the 64. And there's even a way to do custom with your channel count. I'm not sure if Pro Tools officially publishes that, but it is, I think, out there if people want to do more than 64 channel audio bridge. I've been doing 128. I haven't tried more. Could be doing more potentially. Okay, so these bridges devices are there. I don't need to show you my audio, my core audio. Oh, yes. Sorry, my Windows friend. Now we're in an audio bridge device conversation for Mac OS. Okay, that's just the reality of it. No more comments. I know there's some new tools, you know, coming down the pipe, you know, for Windows, but still very limited and still uncharted territory, okay, in a lot of ways. Good. Moving on. Oh, are we moving on? Yes. So what we're going to do now, we're going to be able to use this Aux IO feature, and we'll do it all together. We're going to be actually choosing the device for input and output. What you actually see on screen right now is me saying on the input side, return from SPAT, right? Inputting to Pro Tools. I'm going to take this Pro Tools audio bridge for 32 channel, which will give me ample channels for what? For the binaural 2-channel, for the 71210 channel, and non-bisonic third order 16 channel will give me ample channels to return my renders. And then on the output side, Pro Tools objects, you know, routing folder objects, sending to SPAT. I'll be using the 64 channel. So I've actually, in this particular example, named them bridge from SPAT, bridge to SPAT. It's kind of easier when we're dealing with it later, right? So we'll do this together. Different to the sync model now, what we've got going here is a quick example of the routing. On the Moto object, you'll have a SPAT send. You'll be feeding that object from the automatic bus that was creating with routing folder. Routing folder involves an actual audio bus that you can send your track to. So this is what's feeding the object. And on the output side, we'll actually have the bridge to SPAT revolution for each of the channel, right? Boom, sending to the bridge. On the return side, kind of a similar scenario. Well, in this case, it's the input that will actually going to be my bridge from SPAT revolution. Now, the binaural is on 11 and 12 on this example because 1 to 10 was the 7, 1, 2, right? So as simple as this. And last but not least, obviously on the output, you'll need to be sending this to your actual track for recording. In my case, it's called a binaural mix. This is what I bring to a track to bounce it and print it. And in the template, this is exactly what you'll see in the template. Okay, good. And we'll be actually moving right now to this next template. This time we'll actually go to a template that's for PT Studio with audio bridge, okay? Same, you know, it's actually the number 3 on the list, PT Studio audio bridge, which was validated for Pro Tools 2020 and up, which 2020 is when routing folder was introduced, my memory is correct. Now beware that audio bridging, although this session is compatible with Pro Tools 2020, actual audio bridging, Aux IO is 2209, okay? So it's September, so it's fairly recent. I'm talking about some new features and simpler workflow in Pro Tools right now. Okay, and then we're actually going to look at how to configure SPAT Revolution to go against that. So let's first actually jump on the Pro Tools side for a quick second. And how is that going? Yes, we have the Pro Tools window. I'm actually going to cancel this out. And we're going to close the earlier session. Do not save, don't save. Et voila. And we're actually going to create a new session. This time we're going to be taking this other template, which will simplify our life. We said number 3 here with the audio bridge. We'll give it a name, webinar, web 19. Okay, and that's going to get created for us. We can, at the same time, creating the tracks. Yeah, we'll solve this all together so you guys understand what's going on and be easier like this. Okay. Making sure everything is good on the program here. Yes, okay, so what we have here, exactly the same template that you saw before. We just no longer have to deal with this whole sync concept. So let's try to resolve the problems. Do we have actual problems on the objects? Yes, the bridge to SPAT is not created right now or is not present, and the returns aren't created as well. So we're going to be solving this all together and showing you the IO bridge. So in the setup IO bridge, here we are with the actual bridge, and you can see that these SPATs are not available. So bridge to SPAT revolution is actually not existing. Okay, so although the buses exist, the physical output is not there. Okay, so we're going to be solving this, and right away we're going to be going into the Aux IO feature. So how do we solve these missing inputs and outputs, which are the bridges? Right now we see the black hole 16 channel, which I'm feeding the audio to you. So we'll click the Aux bridge. It tells you, allows to use blah, 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 blah. Beware of latency, a few messages and information to check. And here's the window I was looking for. So now we have all our core audio devices. What we're going to do on the input side, 32 channel. On the output side, 64. And actually, if I rename this correctly, bridge, it should actually fix all our problem. To SPAT. I think this was it. Bridge from SPAT. Oops. Better if I write it correctly. Bridge from, bridge to. Even if it doesn't resolve it on the name, I'll actually show you. Here we are on the input side. We have a bunch of bridge input that we can actually use, and they're coming from bridge from SPAT. On the output side, we actually have a bunch of bridge to SPAT, so going from Pro Tools to SPAT, all created. What's going on our buses? Yeah, it's still not resolved. We can actually resolve this if my memory is correct. Again, our famous shortcut, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 31, 32. So yeah, so the 32 objects now are actually, or bridge channel, are actually feeding the proper output. We've just resolved that. Now, what is not being resolved? Yeah. So yeah, so we are good with this. We actually have the capability to go to SPAT. On the return side, we're going to be wanting to have some actual, inputs. We're going to be using only 11 and 12 for today. I will remind you, obviously, in the case of a bridge, if we wanted to have a 712 input, we'll need to actually delete this and create a 712 to take the first 10 channels, right? That is just a Pro Tools reality here. So I'm just going to, skip that part for now, because here on the binaural audio one, my actual bus bridge from SPAT 11 and 12 is actually available. So what do we have going now? I have some objects. This is all clear. It's feeding SPAT, right? With the bridge, if I look here, bridge to SPAT 2, bridge to SPAT 3, it's all good. Let me just mute this baby before it goes in our ears. Voila. Voila, voila. So we are solved for the objects, and what we'll need to do now is on the return side, well, I showed you the 11 and 12 output, and which is already in our template, so we'll get in SPAT in 2 seconds. So we're good, we're really good to go here. Maybe we just want to rapidly insert our Akagera tracks again. At least, yeah, we could just bring them there. So we have them again. And I'm just going to take the trombone in that particular case and send it to object 1 for the sake of, so the trombone mono object 1. Just routing this quite rapidly so we can be listening to our beautiful trombone. Isn't it great to do a demo with trombones? We like trombones, don't we? Is it there? And Hugo, don't forget to patch your users so they can hear you on the bus. And the binaural output, I want to make sure that I send you with output 1, 2. This is the main playback engine. So this is how both are there, right? Your main audio device, which in my case is my bridge to you, is actually different than the bridge to SPAT. Good. That doesn't sound like a trombone. But that's okay. Yes, because we're listening to the other tracks. That's all good because they are going to that bus by default. We'll patch them later if we want to. Let's jump into SPAT. Good. Okay, let's do this. Let's go see what do we have to configure in SPAT to get this going. And that's going to be actually quite short. It's going to be a quite short portion. So our SPAT, and actually we can go SPAT full screen on this one. There we are. So on the SPAT side, what's involved here, and I can maximize this for you guys. We're going to be closing this session. Yes. So we are starting from scratch. What's involved here? Well, we'll need to set audio device in this case. Going in preferences will allow you to set the audio device. We did not have any hardware I/O before, and that is strictly because we weren't using any audio hardware. We were using the local audio pad. Now we'll decide on the input side, it's the Pro Tools Audio Bridge 64 channel, and on the output, the 32. Sample rates and all this is all fine. Now I have you configure SPAT and look at SPAT. I just want you to appreciate these OSC connections. I have 5 OSC connections in this SPAT setup. First one comes from the SPAT remote server. So I can actually input from this third-party remote tool that we're providing. And on the output side is going to because it's a bidirectional integration. And then here is the actual need to configure your input SPAT Revolution for plugins and your output to the SPAT send, the SPAT return, whatever SPAT plugin you use, you need to set this when you are in Audio Bridge and we are using OSC. You need to set those to get the automation going. You set this once, it's saved. You don't need to redo it every single time. This is well explained in various places, but yeah, this is not part of the template. This is SPAT setup, right? So these two parts, hardware I/O and OSC, are mandatory. You do once when you close SPAT. I'll remember this for the rest of your life, so you don't necessarily need to deal with it, but this is where you would, and these are all presets created for you, so it's very, very simple. It's very simple to actually just add, you know, you don't have to spend too much time on this. Okay, back, and you see it's saving the preferences for me. It will remember that. Back to the home page. This time I'm going to open the template for the actual audio bridge, so not the LAP one, the other one. And now the actual inputs won't be from software input. You'll see again the HOA mix is muted. That's normal. Now all these inputs you don't see in green because it's not a software. These are hardware input, and they're actually all patched and all ready. We've got the mono, the stereo, the same setup as before, the 3 rooms, and let's see what that does. Let's see what that does. I'm actually going to get back into, up. Let's go SPAT and Pro Tools this time. Okay, good. So this is muted. Looks like it works right away because we played and we have a trombone. So if we keep playing with it, you see now muting the binaural room, it's muting. And this is obviously the return of the 712. You can appreciate, you know, yeah, the 712 is not returning right now. I was explaining to you, we need to set those up. I'm not going to spend actual time on this right now. Well, I can actually, if there is a requirement for it. But yes, I think you understand the concept. The input needs to have the proper track format. But in the binaural, we did this. And voila, I think that pretty much explained. Let me actually take the time. Yes, time is pressing, but this webinar can be watched online later if you have to go. I know we're passing the time a bit, but there's a lot to talk about. Let me briefly explain what I was talking about here is that in these particular bridges, we can't obviously feed 4 stereos into our 712 return. So what would typically happen there is we could be deleting those paths, and we can create a new path that is a 712 path. Thank you. And we can call this bridge from SPAT 712 if we want to. All right, so that will allow us to resolve what was a problem and do create. Oh, and thank you. It patched everything wherever, whatever, exactly where it needed. Sometimes Pro Tools can be our best friend. I don't even need to patch anything. So my channel 1 and 10 now, and if you want to actually be looking in SPAT and in the setup side, if I go down there, yes, this is 1 and 10 feeding, where this was 11 and 12, where the HOA was 13 and up. So yes, 1 and 10, going back to Pro Tools in the actual bridge. Sorry, my window can be minimized there to help you a bit. So yes, so we have now the ability to bring this 712 channel 1 to 10 where to our 712, and this is the first one here, right? Bridge from 712. I've just resolved it. It's now available, and if we play again, what's happening? Well, we see some 712 return, and if I mute it, it's no longer there. Watch. Can you see it? I think. Oh, you can't see it. Look at that. Oh. Probably gonna be better like this. So you see the 712 here. You see the 712 when I mute it, it's no longer there. If I mute it. So this is it. This is returning binaural 712 other 916. We haven't updated the template to 916. I'm probably going to keep this for a later conversation using 916, in SPAT, returning it to Pro Tools and exploding it to 16 or 15 objects to declare as objects for Adobe workflow. Did not want to mix the conversation. Wanted to keep it fairly simple. Still a lot to cover, but for people that are familiar with, a routing folder, and patches overall in Pro Tools, should actually, find a home in what I am explaining. I hope so anyway. Just going to reorganize the windows a bit because I felt it was actually messy for a second. Voila. As I said, if you had seen how many windows we have here. So good. Let's go. Let's actually go back to where we left it. We've looked at how we configure SPAT. That was fairly simple, right? I don't think, we need to go over that too much. Let me just get back. Okay, let's talk about the automation aspect, and that's quite going to wrap this all up. So from the the automation perspective, we've looked in SPAT, as to configuring these ports for that bidirectional integration from and to SPAT. So, and there's specific presets for the plugin. You just got to choose them, make sure they're activated. We've talked about the fact that we'll be able to move parameters in SPAT, and we've done this before, and it was writing. In the Pro Tools lane itself, I don't think I need to explain anyone that. And via Avid Control, which I can do. And we'll do it on this one quickly. But in the case of people that are using our SPAT remote control, we can use this as a tactile interface. And you saw me in the SPAT configuration configuring the OSC port for that configuration. Now, other OSC tool could be used as well for actually writing, but just beware that there's concept of touch releases and when you write automation as well. And if the remote control does not send these value, this can actually become challenging to provide all the automation modes that exist in Pro Tools. Just saying this, but the SPAT remote control, which come from us as these complete mechanisms, so you can play touch edit on them. And we're actually going to just go back and do it together briefly to see what's going on, and that's going to kind of wrap up our day. So automation with STAP, right? So we know this plugin automation, which parameter we can choose as lightly as possible or as, crazy as you want to go. There's no limitation there. In the templates, they are preset for you. There is, to make sure they are set. Important to say, though, and we've covered this before, we are by default recording and playing back azimuth elevation distance, AED polar mechanism. You can use XYZ mode as well, but you have to change it. It's in the plugin, and per plugin, you change it. Well, when we go back and do automation, it'll show you briefly. But this is important to understand, if you rather have one or the other. Anyway, SPAT is doing the translation. You may not need to be overly concerned about it. But if you are specifically wanting to write something on the lane, on the X, for example, on the Y, while trying to manipulate this with azimuth distance is going to be a mind challenge, that's for sure. Okay, and for people that don't want to have to deal with this automation thing every single time dialogue, in the preferences in Pro Tools, you can say auto-enable everything for control by default. So this way, it's all there. You just got to watch what you're recording, what you're potentially erasing, and so on and so forth, okay? So yeah, and the automation preferences. Good. And we're not going to listen to that particular session. We played it last week, 2 weeks ago. I was kind of interested in just showing you basically, a bit of writing using Eucon, using the SPAT remote quite rapidly. And then we're going to go a kind of a review. How can we do this from scratch, not using the template? And we're pretty much done. So let's actually jump on just briefly the automation story. Just going to grab Pro Tools, and do we have an iPad? Do we have an iPad? What does it look like? Yes, we have an iPad. We have Eucon control, and we have the ability, let's say, to choose an actual track, and we can go in our objects here. Let me open the folder, and object 1 was our trombone, correct? All right, so that is object 1. You're gonna go, yes, I know. Select object 1. This is our channel of object 1, and in object 1 we have the SPAT send plugin that's there, right? Like any plugin. So we would be able actually to manipulate right there. Let me actually make sure that you can see this in action in Pro Tools. We're gonna open the automation lane, SPAT. Let's take our azimuth, elevation, distance. And while we talk about azimuth, elevation, distance, I said I would show you if you open the plugin, and it is open, let me just bring it in the window. You see position mode is actually polar. You can change this to Cartesian, from polar to Cartesian. That's what makes it right. So if you are in the wrong mode and you're trying to write X, Y, Z, yeah, you won't be able to, okay? Write and read X, Y, Z, well, you won't be able to. So important to note that one. Okay, good, we are there. We can go in, well, just in simple write mode. We are on object 1. I'm gonna manipulate here, and you see I'm manipulating. I'm not sure what you're seeing, but I think you are seeing, yes. I'm manipulating and I'm actually writing. So obviously Eucon control S1, whatever is mapped to it, will do the work. And I'm going to push this a step forward, and I'm going to just take my lovely remote, which is in a web browser right now. And we're going to go to the SPAT object number 1. I can actually solo the object, but this is not what I want to do. I want to be moving. And is it still writing? It is indeed writing. For that matter of fact, if we stop that playback and we play, we should see some movement. Make sure we're in read mode. Voila. So we see some movement in the SPAT remote. Again, just to show you the bidirectional integration. Now, this is not Pro Tools that speaks to the remote. It's Pro Tools that speaks to SPAT, SPAT that speaks to the remote, okay? So we're not going to spend too much time on this. You know, SPAT remote as documentation, as everything. Just wanted to show you that, yeah, you could use this tactile control, select an object, a source, you can solo it, you can manipulate it, manipulate different parameters. It's a little cool remote. It's a web browser from an iPad, from whatever computer. Big iPad, small iPad. This is just a little small iPad there. Okay, good. So we're going to be kind of wrapping this up. Always, always, always so many things to talk about. Such a fun subject. We didn't make too much music. I wish we would have done more, but that's it. You can actually do all this from, you know, starting from scratch, eh? Right? That is not a problem. And starting from scratch would mean what? Oops, sorry for that. You know, starting from scratch will be meaning what? Well, will meaning this, right? You'll set up your I/O setups. You'll configure your aux I/O. You'll be actually, have some output buses that gets automatically created, and routed to these aux I/O. This is automatic when you configure the aux I/O. So from a straight session, you're going to modify your input to match your desired track width. We just did this, the 712, right? We had a bunch of mono stereo. We deleted it. We made the track width that we want for input for return. We're going to be adding our mix bus, to route our beds to tracks, right? So we have these mix buses, these auxes that are the SPAT return. Well, we actually make sure that we have these buses to send from the bus to the actual track to bounce. And again, we'll have outputs such as the binaural output that I have before that I sent you for monitoring. So that's kind of the I/O setup story. And then the rest, we've covered it, but in review, right? We're just creating routing folder, right? And we can then move tracks to, or literally patch tracks to these routing folder buses, insert the SPAT send, route the folder to the created bus from our I/O setup equation, and we're done on the input side. On the output side, create the aux return for the desired bed. Oh, a binaural, a 712, and so on and so forth. On the input side, we're actually going to take the input from SPAT to these actual aux returns, these beds. On the output side, we'll be going to the actual track for bouncing, thanks to the bus we've created on the left side on the IO setup again. And then we'll send that, that bounce track, basically, the record to the system, to the output, and we are actually done. So voila, I think we're going to wrap this up for today. We're passing again just to actually, and we'll take some quick questions, and we really have to close this shortly. Always fun to be speaking to you about this stuff. I'm not sure we have many questions. Maybe we do. We'll try to cover them. Otherwise, we're going to be taking them in our FLUX user immersive user group on Facebook. A lot of activity there, people asking questions. It's great to be able to put the question there because we can share it to the community. Reminder, SPAT Revolution, Essential, Ultimate. The Essential is 32 by up to 16 speakers setup or ambisonic or binaural. You can do multiple rooms, but one at a time. And then we've got the full Ultimate environment. And I'm going to be, and then the licenses, we've kind of talked about this, right? Perpetual license with 1 year support. Oh, there's some great deals going on right now, by the way, with 50 off, even on SPAT, which is actually quite rare across the board. It's a summer. We felt good for the National Day in France, and we actually, did this promo. So it's actually online for probably a bit now. And there's always the options to rent to own. So you rent and whatever money you spent, it gets used towards your purchase after a period of time. So voila, Q&A. Let's remove my face there. Maybe we have a time for a question or two with my dear Arsène friend. That's right there. Phosphor Studio. Is the return plugin necessary in this Aux IO scenario? Very good question, actually. The answer is no. Unless you want to automate, because we didn't spend too much time on automation on the return, but the return allows you to control your master in SPAT. So if you want to mute it, control the gain, you can actually do this with the SPAT return. But you're right that you don't need it. The reason it's there, it's number one, to allow this, and number two, because it came from the same template as a local audio pad. We left it there. It's part of the concept as send a return. But you're right. There is no need for a return if you don't want to automate the master. Because your question is very interesting, I did not spend time on SPAT Room, but there is a plugin that's called Room that you could put as well on that return, and would allow you to control the room property, reverb engine, room gain of that 712 of that binaural. I can take a second just to show this because it's quite straightforward and I believe it deserves. But on the actual return for Phosphor Studio, on the actual return of the 712, I could be adding the actual SPAT Room plugin. There it is. And the SPAT Room plugin is there. You see there is no LAP function. This is just for control. The index number represents the room number. Room 1 right now is our 712. This is all set, and I already had set it in SPAT. Now I have all these automation parameters that I can actually automation dialogue. So you can control the heaviness, the early, the cluster, all the reverb engine, listener, yaw, pitch, roll, because you can move the listener in binaural audio, automate it, and so on and so forth. The gain of the room as well. So all these parameters are there for you. So to answer your question, yes. And no, you don't need to use the return. We put it there to control the masters if you want to. And yes, you would be adding the room as well, plug into that same return track. Again, is it necessary to have your returns come in on a aux track, or is it a problem with them coming directly in your print track? I guess there is no problem to bring it directly on the print track. There's no longer the sync concept I was explaining you before. Again, and it's more of keeping things organized. These are, if I want to be processing, that actual bed, I would process it on the aux track itself, most probably to keep kind of the print track. But yeah, you could put it there, right? So it's more of a structure of, hey, I have a bus, I can process that bus. It's either clean or processed, but it's my choice. And it's a different thing there wherever I send it if I decide to. But yes, there is no problem that I can think of. No, there is not. You're returning the signal to a track, and yes, you're right. You're right. Good one. Is that it? I think this is it. I think this is it for now. If there are more questions, thank you, Arsène, for managing social media and the question on this. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this. It's always a bunch of things. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it anyway. Oh, not my face on this one. But I enjoyed it. There's a lot to talk about. It's always a challenge. Next webinar, not determined yet. In 2023, new SPAT Revolution release, new plugin with ARM support and VST3 as well. Big release, new features. Oh, can I mention any feature like a scoop? Oh, can I? Yeah, I guess I can. Groups. Oh, yeah, I said groups. I could say other things like that, but a bunch of interesting features coming. So we'll be doing this webinar in August. Most probably more webinar about Pro Tools, Dolby. There's so many other subjects we need and want to cover. So hope you guys had a great, hope you guys had a great time here. I'll say a little bye-bye to you. We're going on almost 90 minutes. It was a long webinar, but it deserved the time. Thanks for watching. Feel free to share it, watch it again, watch the previous part 1, ask questions on our user group, and we'll be happy to answer them live. So that's it for me right now. Have a great end of day, and thank you.